another aspect, a very, very important aspect of the charter experience will be, especially one like this with emphasis on the medium, will be documentary filmmaking. And Steve Rosen reminded me that we first started our acquaintance over 40 years ago. And with Steve Rosen and Terri DeBono here on my left, we have perhaps in our area the premier documentary makers. And you folks have done some fantastic work. And we want our students to be aware of the work that you're doing. Tell me about what is a documentary movie? Steve?
You know, there are about as many definitions for that as there are for almost any kind of media or literature. In my mind, a documentary film is a film that follows the story rather than leads the story, and that's how Terri and I approach our films. We don't, you know, earlier on you asked us to talk about maybe storyboarding. Well, you know, there are people that do that, but we don't. Because storyboarding locks you into a story. It tells you start from the beginning with a preconceived notion. Okay, this is what we're going to tell. This is what we want people to come away with. Well,
like a script.
Like a script. And if it's a true documentary, if you're truly documenting something, and it doesn't have to be something earth-shattering. It doesn't have to be, you know, a big issue. But any story, if you're truly trying to find the essence of what that story is, you need to follow it rather than lead it. So what we usually do is we usually interview key people first, and we get from them their impression of what it is, where we should be going with the story. Then after that, we begin feeding in the other elements, but sometimes halfway through, maybe even the editing process, the story will change because we'll realize, oh, I didn't remember he said that, and that doesn't fit with what we've been doing. So we really need to look at this.
But we do start out, Steve, with a theme.
A theme.
That there's a theme, whether, let's take Accidental Hero about the teacher, it was the good that he brought. He taught the kids to fight with words and not with fists, basically, is the theme of the thing. And then when you go in, you have to see how he does it. But we let them tell us, because we don't know.
Now, in that case, Terri, how do you act? Are you a team? Is somebody on the camera? Somebody's the editor?
That's a very unique film we made, because I was a teacher for 14 years in the classroom. And when we were hired by California Teachers Association to go into different California schools up and down the coast for positive stories. Well, we went into Logan High School, which is in, basically it's, Union City, south of Hayward. And we were supposed to do a show on parent involvement. Well, we went in and we sat down, and these two kids, it was a forensics class, which is speech, oral, interp, and debate. And I sat there having taught drama as a teacher. I'm thinking about parents that help the kid. And I watched two kids perform as good as things I have seen on the London stage. I said, Steve, we got to shoot this. Okay, shot that. But it's that kind of, you know, communication between us. And then that wasn't our show then. We finished the show we were doing there, and then we said, we have to come back.
So we came back for 2.5 years.
Yes.
2.5. We followed several of his kids for 2.5 years, and of course Tommy and his sort of philosophy about education. And but you know, that's just one example. The reason that Terri and I like making documentary films is that we get to meet these people who you never get to meet otherwise. And we get to kind of choose the way we go about it. I mean, even a lot of times when we do films for clients, because we kind of have a little bit of a reputation, we get to kind of choose the way we approach the story, the way we tell the story. And that's really fun to do.
Right. Now, we're all here, it's a part of career technical education. Now, presumably you can make a living out of doing this. And that, how do you do that?
Well,
do you
define
have to,
living. You know,
on
I
the
mean,
Monterey Peninsula, we're still here. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But we're still here because we were kind of grandfathered in from the time that it was almost affordable to live here. But that aside, you know, I went to UCLA Film School, and my graduate advisor was a guy named Lou Stuman, who developed. Well, I won't go into that story, but he. When I took his first documentary film class, the very first thing he said at the beginning of that class was, if you're here because you think you're going to make a living making documentary films, you should get up and leave right now, because I'll tell you, you've got to do commercials, you've got to do corporate, what were called industrial films back then, and now they call them corporate films. You've got to do a lot of other kind of stuff to pay the bills, because documentary filmmaking is something that you do for the heart, and that's okay.
And you do.
And
You
that's
pick
okay.
the subject that is dear to you, but the raising of the money for that does take a lot of time. So you do take other jobs. You take commercials, local commercials. You take local corporate films. But at the same time, I'm busy writing. I'm part of the grant writing team, which you and you seek out the institutions, the foundations that agree with what you're wanting to make.
Sure, yeah.
And then you get there, you ask for 25,000 and you get 5 or whatever it is.
Right.
But it keeps you going, and that's how, it's basically stubbornness.
Sure, and to sustain this vision, you have to do like these young fellows are doing out here. You have to start, perfect your camera skills, perfect lighting and sound and so forth, all of it going into making you a marketable person, and then getting out and doing your thing. Because you understand the different
parts that go together.
Absolutely.
Another thing that's fun about filmmaking in general is because it does incorporate so many different disciplines.
Yes.
You know, there's musicians. We're almost always dealing with musicians who are doing music for us. There's makeup people. There's, you know, I mean, there are all these different people, there are all these different jobs, basically. Now, admittedly, in most of the documentary filmmaking we do, it's just Terri and I and a sound man. You know, and that's just the three of us. We don't have a crew.
Until why? Because I know we don't work in the same style.
It's an intimacy thing. We believe that people, if you're asking people to tell their innermost secrets, they're not going to tell their innermost secrets to a crowd. So we don't go in with a crowd. We go in small. We go in with little lights like these that you have here on the floor, and they don't create any heat, which is why you're using them, and they. And so you end up with a situation where after a few minutes, in fact, when we used to shoot film, because film is very expensive, you know, now everything's digital and almost anybody can shoot anything forever. But with film, it was very expensive. So what we used to do, we had this technique where we would go in and we would start the interview for the first 10 minutes. I wouldn't even shoot
anything.
I would have the camera on my shoulder. I generally handhold. I would have the camera on my shoulder, and I would act like I was shooting. But it was just to get the person used to the fact that the camera was there. Then once they forgot the camera was there, and once they'd already told their story, because what happens is that the night before you interview somebody, they think about, what am I going to say? Okay, and they plan it. They script it in their head.
And the night before we interview somebody, I do research so that I know what they've done and what I want them to say. And I think it comes from my Southern hospitality or whatever it is, but I can sit there like I'm on the porch with somebody in a lemonade and talk to, say, a Japanese American that was being fired upon by the Germans, and he would bare his soul. I would...
Wow.
I was the one that they had to stop the camera for because I was crying.
Oh, okay.
Several times.
Yeah, you know, we're talking with Steve Rosen and Terri DeBono from MAC+AVA Productions and award-winning productions, films, documentary film. And you do have prepared a little video for us, and why don't you talk a little bit about what it is that we're about to see?
Okay, these are trailers for several of our films, and I picked kind of, we've made a lot of films. I mean, I don't even know the number, but it's because of a lot of the short films we've done, like for the California Teachers Association, for instance, it's somewhere over 1,000. But I picked trailers that we created either for television or for online presentation for films that we've made, primarily that were broadcast in one way or another on PBS.
Right.
Yeah,
I was going to say
on PBS. Okay, so do we want to roll the film? And
I think it sort of speaks for itself. It kind of
Okay.
tells what film,
Excellent.
and each one is about 3 minutes long or something.
Okay.
I remember when I was young, just when people would talk about Pearl Harbor, I felt really bad. Like it was my family did that. Because, I mean, for Japanese and Japanese Americans, that whole thing of shame is so prevalent, I think. I mean, you know, don't embarrass your family, don't embarrass this, and then to have this horrible thing happen at Pearl Harbor, it's like, oh no, we have to all rally together and make it all better. Even though I don't know a lot about the history of it and the enormity of what the 442nd did, if they hadn't been as heroic and brave, I think it would have been really hard to be Asian in this country.
Who were these men that died so bravely? What caused them to fight so furiously? These, then, are their stories, our stories. Stories of Americans who fought with everything they had and won.
This is the first time I even talk about experience of war. But if we don't tell it now, when are we going to tell it? There'll be nobody to tell it pretty soon.
Gonna take a sentimental journey. Gonna set my heart at ease. Gonna make a sentimental journey.
Some of the kids you'll see still don't know what the level of competition is all about. They've never been into battle, if you will. I always believe in a quote that Chuck Knowles of the Pittsburgh Steelers, champions don't win all the time, they win when they have to win.
Oh, you should have seen him. I looked that sucker up and down, and I knew from the look in his eyes that I had.
Today, we've met the strangers in a strange land. We understand how things are stranger than paradise. And
Life
we know now
is pain, but it's pain. Life. Hey, look at all the clowns.
You have to be able to get a kid to an emotional level where they're ready to compete. Like a lot of kids have, some of the issues that are going on at home, and they escape by coming to forensic to get rid of some of those types of things.
Somebody, anybody, tell this fool he's got AIDS and put him out to his missus.
So you have to be a psychologist, you got to be a mother, you got to be a father, you got to do all of these things and still realize that you're dealing with some very delicate egos.
people stared at us through them glass doors.
This is a tough surprise. This is a tough surprise. Before the show, I was saying, if this happened to me, I'd be peeing in my pants. Tommy was the subject of an award-winning documentary called Accidental Hero, Room 408. And for all of the outstanding work that you do with these amazing students, you get our $100,000 Use Your Love.
Wow. Wow.
Helped his brother.
In the 1920s, a young Edward Weston visited California's Monterey Peninsula. There, he and other gathering photographers would change photography as it was done and as it was to be perceived forever.
I look at what Edward Weston did in more than one way. I think if you took his name off the photographs, they may not get the recognition that they get today. In today's world, I think there are better photographers. But in 1920 to 1940, there certainly weren't. Edward Weston, to me, is responsible for a major movement in the last 50 years in photography, maybe the last 60 years.
Weston's darkroom is still used today by his grandson, Kim Weston.
Edward had the simplest tools. There's a simple contact frame. You just take the negative, put the paper on, and then he would expose it to the light, which all he used was a simple light bulb.
Weston was one of several photographers who met in 1932. That meeting was the beginning of Group F64. An aspiring young concert pianist named Ansel Adams was at that meeting.
I had a new piano at the time, which he just adored. Oh, he would play, and I would play, and we'd play duets, and he was training to be a concert pianist.
So when I decided to change, my friends said, don't give up your music. The camera cannot express the human soul. But they never thought that a photographer could use an instrument that seemed to them mechanical. And yet what is more mechanical in one sense than a piano? They have to realize that that's what you do with it.
We came to the United States in 1967. My father had a student visa, but that didn't allow him to work, and we didn't have much money, so he had to work.
We don't worry we're poor because we can work hard. We can make some living, but not the permission.
If they found out, maybe kick us out.
They're here to check for green cards. He says, come with me. I'll show you a way to get out. Down the freight elevator and then out the back.
I wanted to write a children's picture book about an immigrant family.
We came to America and we want to stay. But it is not easy to become an American if you are not born here. Growing up, I always felt like I'm here because of the benefits that the Caucasians who came here earlier provided us. But now I realize that
this is a nation of immigrants.
And I no longer feel like I am a guest in this country.
Something happens to you when you're young. It's like being stabbed in the brain.
With my little boy on his first school bus today.
Finally, the world has realized that there's sexual predators out there. Priests, teachers, Boy Scout leaders.
Careful, son.
They're wherever young people are.
Don't talk to anyone.
Here comes this person who has power and control and comfort.
A grown man in his 30s manipulating a 10 or 11-year-old boy. Yeah, I want revenge. I want to see him punished.
This guy's still out there somewhere. You know he's not the only child that this man's hurt.
He hasn't gone after him yet, but I said I want an hour. I said I want an hour with him.
Don't talk to anyone.
He told me about it, then he swore me to secrecy. You know, he begged me not to tell.
And he heard, be careful, little one. Don't you talk to anyone.
But then he was suicidal, and I didn't know what to say.
And then I tried to kill myself. But it didn't work.
This man took him back down to the park and killed a duckling and said, this is what will happen to you if you speak about this.
Don't talk to anyone.
I remember being in school and I would say, is it happening to him or maybe it's happening to that kid?
Basically, in our culture, what happens is a lockdown of secrets.
And it's one of the last things that our society is loath to bring out of the closet. But you know what? It's coming out.
Will we know what has been done if we don't talk to anyone?
One of the first things I learned in my life was not to tell anybody anything.
I swear to God, I would never let anybody know. Never.
Mission San Antonio is an island in time, 20 miles from the nearest town, virtually undisturbed since the Spanish period, the first urban settlement in Monterey County.
This place has been here for 240 years, and we want people to continue to enjoy it.
Most of the artwork that's in the missions were painted in studios in Mexico City.
We learned that Indians made the mission.
1,300 slain Indians lived close by here when the Spaniards first came.
Mission San Antonio broke down in an earthquake, and and then they restored it.
But it's not up to today's standards using steel. And that is something that has been mandated by the state, or we will be shut down. There will be no one allowed inside the buildings anymore.
The California missions are absolutely vital to understanding the state's history.
And they're part of our heritage.
They're California's pyramids.
Everybody always says you're supposed to look ahead, but I like to look at things that happened in the past.
Oh my goodness, that's most impressive. Most impressive.
Thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
And to think that we have such talented and gifted people in our little community here. And during the movie, Terri commented on several of them, and you mentioned that the one movie in particular that was so difficult to do.
Void Shadows.
Yeah. Is that but it's something that needs to be said.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yes.
that's why I think that's what documentaries are about,
Right.
is you pick a subject
Yes.
that needs to be talked about.
Yes, yes.
Whether you want to or not. And this is a very difficult subject, but we may, and I don't want to say entertaining,
Yes.
but it was watchable, and you learned and were enlightened by it.
Right.
At the end, you said, oh my goodness, I have to learn what to watch for.
Right.
If a child is abused, if it's a sexual abuse, is what this basically the film is about for boys, not girls. Girls we took care of a few years ago. Boys now have been going through this for years, and just going through it and watching these men. These are adult men telling how they coped.
Yeah, yeah.
And most of it was with some sort of abuse, whether it was alcohol or drugs. And it just didn't need to happen. And I think what upset me so much during this, it was 5 years, is that they are not the same people that they should have been.
Oh, Terri, yeah.
Wouldn't
So
you say
gripping.
Yeah. And and so what happens is that when you work on a film like a documentary,
Yes.
it's different than working on a narrative feature
Right.
or something like that, or even a short. A short. You take on a lot of what you're because you become friends with these people.
Sure.
So, sleepless nights. I mean, it was a very, very. It's the toughest thing we've ever done, and it was also. Then when we were done with it, we were so proud of it, and we couldn't get it into a film festival. We fought and fought. We thought for sure it was going to go to Sundance. They form letter, it was like nobody wanted to see this film. So we actually ended up making another film called Looking for an Audience, which was about how hard it was to get people to watch this film.
Oh, okay.
And Terri fought, we tried HBO, we wanted HBO originally. We tried everything, and finally it did last month premiere. KQED presented it nationally for PBS, and it currently is showing. It is still showing nationally in various affiliates on PBS.
What are you currently working on? What do we have in the hopper?
We're doing client jobs, actually, local client jobs. We do yearly. We do films for the hospital, for Community Hospital, Monterey Peninsula. They're donor films. The people that they want to thank who have helped them.
Right.
They're mini biographies.
Yeah, little. Sort of tributes.
Right.
And then we've just, actually we haven't even signed the paperwork yet, but we're just beginning on a 10-minute film for CSUMB, which is, designed basically to interest future students. And I know you're associated with CSUMB.
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, your movie about the Japanese experience during World War II brings to mind that kind of one of the forefathers of this whole movement is Luis Valdez and his teledramatic arts and technology, and that's kind of the prototype of what we're trying to do here. And of course, Luis has, and I've seen the reading, it's a stunning new play, Valley of the Heart, and it is about the experience of the Japanese ranchers, farmers that were interned, and what happened to their property while they were being interned. Amazing piece of work.
people stepped up to help.
Some folks stepped up, and frankly, some stepped down.
Yes,
but
right.
Luis has done a magnificent job.
Oh,
and he's
wonderful.
sort of
I'd love to read that.
Kind of the father of us all. Again, it is so special for us to interview you, and we hope for the Millennium Charter High School that our premier documentary makers will have a chance to come back and
We'd love to
talk
come back.
with our kids.
Yeah.
And talk with our community too. And thank you guys for shedding light on these topics.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for asking.